Hello, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of Just Get a Real Job podcast. I'm, of course, your host, Jamie McKinley. Thank you very much for watching this video. Thank you for tuning in, for listening to the podcast. If you're listening on other podcasting platforms as well, be sure to give us a follow or a subscribe as well. It really helps us to keep growing and to find new listeners. And as I say, I'm 156 episodes into this journey. We're only recently started to be on YouTube, and I'm still very much learning being on camera, how this all works. So yeah, thank you for your patience. Thank you for your continued support. I think it's good as creative people to sort of fail and to keep learning new things. And yeah, we're very much doing that. But this week's episode is another deep dive into the ongoing crisis facing the TV industry. I'm sure as many of our listeners know, especially if they're sort of working in TV or trying to forge a career in TV, that it's a really difficult time. Lots of people are out of work. It's just, yeah, lots of things have gone wrong. And it was lovely to do another episode exploring some of the reasons behind that. And it was an absolute pleasure to be joined by a BAFTA award-winning series producer like Hannah Beaugeard, who has had an incredible career working in factual. She's worked across various other parts of the creative industries as well, including things like branded content, lots of other things. Really experienced individual with lots of experience in TV. And it was lovely to chat to her, not only about the crisis itself in TV, but how to upskill yourself as a creative. There's lots of great tips for people to take away from this. We spoke about how often working in TV, we attach a lot of our identity to it. Often in TV, we're made to feel dispensable. She's had lots of interesting experiences. She also wrote lots of interesting articles on our LinkedIn, which is underneath the show, all about some of these topics that we discuss. It's quite a long episode, so yeah, feel free to pause it, feel free to listen and enjoy it however you want. If you want to skip to like an hour in, we really get into some of the things people can do to upskill themselves in particular. But I think it's a really good value episode. I'm really, really proud of this one. And Hannah's an amazing individual. And yeah, I think conversations like this are really important, and I hope you enjoy it. But yes, that's all. That's my video intro. I'll hopefully get better at these as we keep going. But yeah, thank you very much for listening to the show and for watching the show. And I hope you enjoy this week's episode. Hannah, how you doing? Thank you very much for coming on Just Get a Real Job on a Friday night and chatting to us. I'm really looking forward to this one. You've been doing some really interesting articles about the ongoing crisis in TV and also sort of what it's maybe like to switch careers slightly and work in other creative sectors. So thank you for joining us tonight.
There is nothing I can think of better than, instead of a glass of wine, pouring myself a chamomile tea and talking to you on a Friday night about crisis.
I'm very glad. Just to sort of start or kick us off, do you want to give us a brief intro to who you are and your background? Because you did quite a varied career. You're a BAFTA-winning producer as well. We'll point that out very early on, which is pretty cool. But also, as I've just mentioned, you'd switched sort of careers. We're in a bit of a crisis in telly at the moment. So just, give us a brief overview quickly and we'll sort of get into some of the more details.
Yeah, sure. First of all, it's a really good job you mentioned the BAFTA in the first few seconds of this interview, because otherwise I've got to get that in there. Got to get it in there. So I started off television in development, really. For those who don't know what that is, it's the stage of television where you basically come up with the ideas for the TV shows. So I started off within a little bit of blue chip, which is kind of like adventure-led, lots of international travel and things like that. Then I went into game shows. I then kind of sidestepped from coming up with the idea for game shows to actually producing game shows, both kind of like things like casting and things like that, writing the questions. I worked at BBC. I produced a series of Mastermind. And then I came back to London. And that was my first foray really into branded content, where I was the paternity cover for quite a large international advertising firm. And it really helped me understand, from all those kind of years of very stringent kind of like television practices, the differences between short form and longer form. And it really kind of put my toes for the first time into short form and what makes the best narrative for a short form, what the different practices were for example, compared from terrestrial to online to publishing, And then from there, I did a bit of a zigzag back into television for a little bit, working at various different things, a little bit of game shows, some factual space as well. So I know you want to hear about that. I can tell you as much as I can. It's really funny because I've worked in so many game shows, but I'm absolutely shit at a pub quiz. I am the worst person ever at a pub quiz. So then from there, I then worked for a national broadcaster, sort of as their head of production, head of content and commissioner. And from there, I created something called the Diverse Film Fund, where because we were a charitable broadcaster, we were able to ask some money from the board of directors to give small pots of money to filmmakers from marginalised communities to create short form documentaries. I trained them myself. We then went through mentorships and things like that. And that's when it really ignited that passion of short form programming for me. Not only was it really obvious how reactive and how instant it could be, because I was working with people who hadn't even, some of them may have done a bit of television, but a lot of them were quite green to producing. So it was a really lovely thing to be able to see it quite instantly, especially with documentary and factual space. Sometimes, especially now with the way that the market is, more and more commissions are feeling timely and feeling quite instant. And I think that short form really fits into that very well. But we went on to, as you so subtly put it at the beginning, went on to win a BAFTA and then was nominated the next year. But it really helped me to get into not only the space of short form, also tentative subject matters, which then I carried on doing true crime and things like that. And this last year has been probably one of my busiest years, which I've been very grateful for, which is that I've been a sort of consultant for streamers and broadcasters and large indies who are looking for ways in which to be able to gain in capital to be able to still create the programming to keep the lights on, basically, when it hasn't been through the major broadcasters. So that's been super interesting. People get me in and then we'll just brainstorm quite often ways in which, you know, whether it's reversioning previous content and uploading it onto other platforms or even just looking for other different financial avenues. It's helped me, I think, my zigzag approach to my career has really helped me be quite resourceful. And I think that now, especially, that's really held me in good stead. And I don't know if you agree with this, but there's often a trope, especially in television, where you stick to your lane. So quite rare to go from one genre to the next. And often it's so tunnel visioned that you'll often see things like job adverts that pop up on Talent Manager, which is a jobs board for TV and film people. And if somebody is watching and looking to get into TV and film, definitely sign up to the Talent Manager. And some of these adverts from big super indies will be like Russian speaking producer needed for underwater sports, you know, so must have 5 years experience. Who has 5 years experience in that? So I think now more than ever, for people who are wanting to be a creative, especially in media, TV or short form, I think that making yourself a Swiss Army knife and making yourself an expert in the things that you're passionate about is just going to make you so much more employable. But yeah. That was a bit of a tangent there, like editing that.
No, not at all. I mean, I'm trying to think what to pick up on because there's a lot there, and the camera's just automatically switched to 7. I'm like, oh, okay, I zoomed in, that's fine. I just saw my face really close up, and I was like, "What?"
It's all right. I haven't got my glasses on. It's quite good for this old girl, but yeah, go on.
I think what you're saying about being in a lane, and sort of we do kind of pigeonhole people in TV a little bit. And I think when we're moving into a time now where work isn't very stable, it's not very consistent, and with things like AI and new technologies coming in, probably now more than ever in the creative industries, we need to be more flexible if we want to survive and find work. but it's really tricky because I've only worked in drama and continuing drama, but there is a weird snobbery from some parts of TV and the creative industry. So for example, say you work in commercial and you applied for a drama job, they may be like, oh, it's commercial, so I don't really want, we won't value the skill. Similarly, continuing drama gets a lot of snobbery towards it from other, high-end drama. I mean, I did the reverse in my career. I went from high-end drama to continuing drama, which is very unusual. But I've experienced it from both sides, where I've been on the other side of it, and I heard people say, oh, it's just a soap, we won't consider that as a credit. In the same way, so I think there's an issue in our industry where like other creative jobs aren't valued. And as you pointed out there, there's lots of, value in different sort of creative roles that fit into each other. And I don't know, we need to maybe utilize that more as an industry, because we have very transferable skills, and in an ideal world, we could just jump across and do different things. And we're going to need to if we want to survive, I think.
1000%. And I think that, if anything, there's been a global economic crisis. In Britain, there's been one for a good few years now. And I think that, unfortunately, in my experience, television especially has probably been one of the last ones to really pick up on that and change its ways. I love television. I always will. I'm so passionate about it. And I am in no way means an expert, but I am actively always trying to seek for the next bit of information. And I'm always trying to be a nosy Parker, basically, just figuring out how people did this and who funded this. And it was really interesting that person produced that, also went on to produce that. So why is that? However, the snobbery of television is widely known. And I think that it comes back down to an air of almost exclusivity. And that obviously is a really dangerous word. It can be a brilliant word. Like, I remember going into pitch rooms when I was a development researcher, and I'd have to get, exclusivity on an archaeological dig in Chile. And I'm just like, well, I'm sat in Putney, but okay, we'll give it a go. But what I mean by that is our industry is so competitive. And I think that people through generations who have been hiring, or those responsible for hiring and seeing what the television landscape looks like, know that basically people are dispensable. As a runner and as a researcher, I remember, and I don't know if you felt the same way, being absolutely terrified that I was going to be fired every single day. And it wasn't because I wasn't trying my best, and it wasn't because I wasn't trying so hard. It's because every single day we were reminded that we were replaceable.
And there's that whole thing, isn't it? It's that whole thing, I'm lucky to be here attitude. Do you feel that all the time? I feel like now, I've been working in my career for nearly 4 years. I've done well, but like I still feel that sometimes, like, I should be lucky to be here. I can't complain about anything. If something's wrong, if something isn't, working or whatever, that's, not a good work environment where, for example, or, whatever issue you may have, it's, you have that sense like, well, I can't raise that because I'm lucky to be here, because I could be replaced, and it's so exclusive completely.
And I'm going to be completely transparent with you. I think many of us in television do. This year, a lot of my friends and me at times, we haven't had work. And so we meet up, and a lot of us will say to each other, what are we without our job? Because we tried so hard, because we felt so dispensable that we made our roles completely a part of our DNA. And we felt lucky for it because there was that feeling of exclusivity. So I'm aware of the privilege that I'm born into. Yes, I do identify as queer, but that happened later on in my career. But I'm a Caucasian female who doesn't have a disability. Whereas people who don't fit into that box of Caucasian male, female, it is a lot harder for them to get into these spaces. And I think there was a great talk recently. I just saw the snippet on TikTok, but it was a TV presenter who's an advocate for inclusivity when crewing both in front and behind the camera. And he said, the reason why is a white landscape is because the people who have been hiring and hiring down, they go, I need an extra one of me. I know that I can do this job, but there's not enough of me around. So I'm just going to go and hire somebody who looks and feels and acts like me. And I think that was so apt. I don't think that it was, maybe sometimes there's prejudice there, but I'd like to think that as human beings, there's not an active thing of, you know, I don't want a person of colour. I don't want someone who identifies as gay in this position. I think it's more of a naivety, a wrong naivety, and it's not an excuse for it, my Lord. But yeah, so I think that here's a really good example. When I first started off in television, I was, in fact, you know what? You found me on LinkedIn, so I'm not going to say what my role was, but I was a very junior person in television. And I remember one of the development producers beckoned me over and said, we have basically hired these really fantastic brainiacs who are out in the countryside in Essex to create a program for us to pitch a game show to a commissioner. However, we need someone to go out and pick it up. Can you go and pick it up? I said, yeah, I can, but I don't drive. And another producer turned around and said, we're not asking you to go because we think you can drive. We're asking you to go because you're a woman, and they probably wouldn't have seen one in ages. And it's very similar kind of things like that. I remember being told to my face in many meetings, oh, we'll take Hannah because this idea has a female skew. I hadn't come up with the idea, hadn't even put my hand on the paper, but they were like, we just need to have that person there, almost like a representative of my gender, you know, which is, now we laugh, you and I laugh about it, but it was only 10, 15 years ago, which is really scary.
Very recent, yeah.
I'm so excited the new generation, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, feel, and I don't want to pigeonhole people into generations, I don't, but being a line manager for about 6-7 years now, I see Gen Z and now Gen Alpha coming onto my teams. And a lot of wider people, they say, oh, they're so opinionated, and oh, they, you know, when it comes to 5:30, they'll clock off. If they come, if the time is supposed to start at 9:30, they'll be there for 9:30. They won't be there any earlier. Things like that. They won't work on weekends, and they won't work late. And I'm going, good. Why should
we want to have life.
Exactly. God knows, I would have loved that. Yeah.
But this is a big problem in TV, isn't it? Because there's an expectation if you're on time, you're already late. That's what somebody told me on my first day as a runner. They're like, if you're on time, you're late. I'm like, well, pay me what time you want me to start then. That's the sort of what you think. But then again, I'm lucky to be here, so I don't want to get sacked. I'll come and not get paid, you know. And that's what people do. And it happens all the time.
Yeah, it does. It really does. I remember turning up to a runner gig my first day an hour and a half early. And I didn't know what to wear, so I'm pretty sure I wore a suit because you know we want to. I know, but I think there's very few other industries that make you feel as though you are that dispensable.
No, I agree.
And there's also very few other industries that have as little rights than what we do. Most of my friends aren't in television. And I think the reason for that being is probably because they've had social lives enough to actually be in bars and meet me in a fleeting moment. But also B, because I'll come home at like 10 p.m., you know, not even on a shoot day or something like that, because of something really trivial and people haven't got back to me and things like that. And my friends will say, hang on, you've been working like 18, 19 days in a row, you know, things like that. It's a very, very different beast to what they're used to.
There's lots to unpack and some very incredibly articulate points already. There's so much to talk about, and I think you clearly have a lot to say on some of these issues. And
from your experience and stuff, and it's great to have you on. I'm already really excited. 17 minutes in, some of the ground we've covered. I just want to quickly wind back to that thing you said about having a life outside of TV, or having a life outside of what you do for a living. And what's difficult about the creative industries, out wider as well, not just in telly, is often it's our passion and it's our passion project. And when you do that for a job, it's difficult to separate your self-worth and self-identity from that. And I haven't really spoken about this much on the show before, but like I was in my dream job for 2 years when I was at STV Drama. I loved the job so much, and my contract couldn't be renewed last summer. When I found out I wasn't going to be renewed, I felt it was like grief. Like for 3 days, I could barely get out of bed. Like I felt it so much. And I'm glad I went through that, because I think from then, and I love the job I do now. I enjoy it. I'm about to say it and I shouldn't. I'm very lucky to be there. I shouldn't have to say that. I worked hard to be there.
Lucky to have you, but yeah, carry on.
I need to reframe that. So there you go. It's still embedded. But I kind of swore to myself, like, I'll never allow my job to be who I am. I always want to have things going on outside in life, whether that be friendships, family, hobbies. My work is part of my life, but it can't be my whole life. And it's tricky to have that, and lots of people don't. And I'm lucky to have a podcast like this, which gives me a lot of fulfillment. But again, you have to make sure it's not your whole life, because if something goes wrong, then, you know, your value's attached to it and it hurts a lot more.
It's so right. First of all, I want to take you back for a second and just remind you that as a hiring manager as well, I need you way more than you need me. And I think that especially being a hiring manager very recently, the last couple of years or so outside of television, just the interview process alone is very different. I mean, gone are the days where, you know, you get your CV downloaded from production base or talent manager and you have a 10-minute phone call, and then that's your career for the next 2 years done. That's the interview you're going to get. You're so right about people's identity being tied up in their roles. It has definitely affected me, and it's still an ongoing thing that I have to address. Maybe 2 years ago is probably when I first started getting burnout. And the thing with burnout is that it gets to a point where your body just shuts down for you because you're not listening to it. However, after quite few kind of tests and things like that, it was established that I probably had been burnt out many, many years before that. And I just didn't listen. COVID was a terrible time for a lot of people. However, for me personally, I had a job and was able to work remotely in that TV job. It was a development role. So I was still able to have income, which a lot of people didn't. But it gave me, because we were isolated from each other, it gave me that separation, forced separation. It took a pandemic to stop me in my tracks and say, what we're doing is wrong. And I think it's also the same as been for the last year. I know people, very incredibly talented people, who don't deserve to not be in their industry because they're award-winning, they're highly commended in their fields, highly respected. But some of them have been out of work for almost 2 years, and they say, I can't pay the mortgage. I've had to take, a job in a supermarket or a bar, but my mental health has never been better. That's not the same for everyone, and I appreciate that. However, what they're saying is that separation from our industry has really benefited them. Yet, if you say to them, but you'll go back to telly tomorrow if I give you a job, wouldn't you? They go, yeah. And it's like this weird, toxic. It's like a bad relationship, and then you get out of the bad relationship, and then 6 months down the line, your ex gives you a call, and then you're like, yeah, all right, let's go for a coffee. It's a really toxic thing. I think that you're making so many good points, but a really good point you made was, working late, I'll only work for what I'm paid for, which is valid, by the way. It's funny because I think in the culture of television, especially factual, when there's so much less money, such shorter time frames, such smaller resources, it's expected, and not even expected, it's almost like breathing air, that you will go above and beyond in order to get that end product that this commissioner is asking for. And I don't think it's necessarily even commissioners' faults. I think it's this desperation from production companies, indies, super indies, and sometimes even in-house, to try and break free in this incredibly saturated market, that then all things like morals, rights, just basic human decencies sometimes get out the way. I remember I worked on a particular project that involved basically most of the contributors were people who were at risk, both through mental health, through being involved in kind of like a rehabilitation of some kind. And we were running behind on a schedule and things like this. And I remember my producer, and I really hope he hears this, but I remember my producer, because we were asking really difficult questions and they were getting obviously quite upset. And so I kept saying, all right, we'll take 5, go outside, go have a cig, go have a coffee, whatever, come back in and we'll regroup and then we'll just carry on and we'll pick up where we left off. And I remember my exec just putting me to one side and going, what are you doing? And I was like, oh, it's basic welfare. He goes, no, that's the gold that we need on television. I want people to break down in front of you. Yeah. And do you know what? That wasn't even that long ago. And I think that I think that especially in the UK, there are so many production companies. If you look at London alone, and if you go to Soho, you can't spit without sitting, without sticking to a production house, an edit house, a Flame, a Grade, a something. You just, and if you're ever in Soho and you're out during the day, if you see somebody looking really worried, dressed all in black, carrying something really quickly through the streets, 9 times out of 10, they're going to be a runner. If you think about that, and that is just in London alone, think about, whereas, for example, Paris, I think there's like 8 or 9 production houses in the whole of Paris and the regions around it. So, yeah, I think that the pressure to stick out and there being very little rights to how cast and crew have been treated. It's gotten a lot better, but it no way means that it's okay. I mean, look at this week alone in the news about Greg Wallace. Greg Wallace has been a known name in entertainment, as I remember somebody, people even like last year just laughing about Greg Wallace going, oh, he'll be next. Because it's just an open secret.
And this is a big issue where no one teaches us how to deal with difficult talent in this industry, because we need the talent for, say, and maybe he's a good example, Greg Wallace, because it's topical right now. But obviously he's one of the main people on the, the show MasterChef. Is it MasterChef? Have I got that right?
Yeah, MasterChef.
Yeah, he's one of the main people on MasterChef. So there could be a fear from a producer, well, if we lose Greg, then no one's going to watch the show and we're all going to lose our job. But then doesn't mean we should just allow somebody to behave terribly and get away with it. But that's the issue. Say, I don't want to name names, but I've seen some actors in real life, terrible behavior. Yeah. And like in any other job, they would be sacked on the spot. But because it's this, as you say, exclusive industry and they're needed for money or whatever, then they just get to continue acting like that. And no one actually takes them aside and says to them, you've been an arsehole. So they probably don't even know, because it's been pandered for so long. And it's this whole...
Exactly.
I'm getting very passionate about this because it's something I think about a lot, and I haven't really talked about it on the podcast either. But yeah, it's very true, and it's a big issue.
There is no reason in any job ever that exists on the planet where people don't deserve to be treated with respect. That's just a basic bottom line, dignity and respect. Because I've worked in factual and entertainment, and I'd love to hear more about scripted around people that in those genres we call talent. I don't know if you heard, but I think it was a commissioning editor at the BBC. You've got to fact check me on that. But I think he recently said, we are no longer calling people in front of the screen talent. And the reason why he said that is because it takes away that pedestal. It's like, you are a member of production. Yeah. And I very love
similarly,
that.
Jack Roach said something really similar. The writer, I think, no, it was Jack Roach, Jack Thorne, actually. Jack Thorne. I'm getting my Jacks mixed up. There is and also someone called that. But yeah, Jack Thorne, who's like a very well-established screenwriter, said recently that he doesn't really like the term showrunner for a similar reason, because it gives this pedestal, like, I'm the showrunner, so I'm, you can still be the main writer on a show, but it doesn't necessarily need to be called showrunner. And it was sort of breaking down the language around it. And I thought that was a really excellent point that you made. Similarly.
I've got, this is a really good example of that, I think, maybe. So I'm an exec producer, and I saw an advert kind of like maybe a year and a half ago, maybe even 2, for a showrunner. Somebody who's got experience in true crime, me. Somebody who's based in England, me, for an international broadcaster. I was like, okay, well, I'm an exec producer, so it might mean something similar. And I got the most scathing email back, just saying, you are nothing like a showrunner. So I just sent a really polite but short email back going, so what is a showrunner? And I think it's really interesting, the differences across. Anyway, that's something completely different. But I think
Sorry, finish your tangent. I apologize.
I'll finish my tangent. But what I was going to say was, in my experience, there's almost been like, you treat talent as almost as if it like they're on fire. You can't touch them. You can't go near them. You've got to let them do what they want to do. But then you've got somebody in your ear going, where's so-and-so? We need them on set in 2 minutes. And then you've got to like shepherd them. They don't patronize me. But then you don't know how to touch them either. You don't know how to connect with them. It's why I love working with people in a factual space, especially especially around tentative subject matters. We've all gone through some of the trauma in our lives. And I think that, through the space of true crime, I have interviewed and worked with people who have done abhorrent things, sex traffickers, murderers, rapists. However, there is still that human dignity there, that as somebody who is owed that needs to get that message to an audience, the best way of doing that is to show that human aspect of yourself. For example, I probably won't have a lot I don't have a lot of knowledge about sex trafficking and things like that. So connecting with this person about that. However, he does have a cat and I have a cat. What's your cat? Do you know what I mean? Putting the human face to somebody. And I think that as a viewer, especially of factual and also of scripted, actually, I'll add, you can't connect with somebody or a character unless you see an element of yourself in them.
That's very true.
These kind of true crime documentaries that are all about, which are actually taking a decline, which I think isn't such a bad thing for our television ecosystem. But I think the series that do the best, they're not the most graphic, they're not the most bizarre. The series that do the best are actually the ones that connect with you the most as a person. For example, the Tinder kind of catfishing stories have done really well and view figures on Netflix and getting recommissioned. Kind of like true crime around, somebody said to me, have you got any true crime where a woman dies? And I just went, I'm really sorry, I'm going to stop you right there. I don't think you quite understand what people are after. The reason why people watch true crime is because it's a sense of voyeurism, but also a sense of connection, the sense of this could have happened to me, or I could have done this. And it's a weird psychological thing that you've got to play in the narrative, which I could go on for ages about. But yeah, sorry, tangent over.
No, it's very interesting. Definitely want to ask you about trends and stuff with that later as well, because I think it's interesting. There's so much to unpack. Like, we go in so many directions. I'm like, that's the thing I love about podcasting, and you've got so much to say, which is brilliant. I just want to quickly circle back to one thing, because we kind of touched on it. Yes. I think it's important. The thing about working, not wanting to do extra work if we're not getting paid for it. I actually think most people, myself included, don't mind occasionally doing a bit, going above and beyond, because if you care about a job, there will be those nights where you're going to work till 10 p.m. I think what the issue is, it's the assumption that will be done regularly most days. Like, we'd all done a Friday night till 10 p.m. For example, for me trying to get a script to end out or something. I don't mind doing that occasionally. What I think a lot of people in my generation and younger have a problem with is that expectation that this will be a weekly occurrence. And again, it's the expectation, or it's a systemic thing. Because I think the other thing to flag is, and we had the amazing Philip Ralph on recently, who's done a lot of great work on sort of speaking out about the crisis in TV and things. But he pointed out that a lot of this is systemic. It's not people deliberately being evil and greedy. Most people mean well, but we're all part of a systemic way of working that is hard to change unless you're in a position to change it.
I have to catch myself on a regular basis with my own team, who I care so much about, but I have to catch myself out, because that systemic thought process. I think I'm a millennial, and I think for my generation of people who worked in television, it wasn't even you're expected to work late. What's more worrying is that, in my opinion, the expectation was you will do whatever it takes to do this. And not only will you do whatever it takes to do this, but you also have to outshine the 5 people sat next to you on this side and the 5 people sat next to you on that side. So not only are you going above and beyond, but then you're even going further, because you're always going to be replaceable, and you always have to prove yourself. Even just saying that just sounds exhausting. So I completely agree with him when he says that. I'd like to think that people aren't intentionally, wanting to see people wither away ever so slowly because they're making them stay late for no reason, putting the people in danger for no reason and things like that. I'd like to think that it is, systematic, kind of like really poor things. I'm sure, and I'm not going to get you to name names, but I'm sure you've had, is it a line manager that you've set that you have in scripted? I've no idea. So I'm so interested to talk to you.
I mean, kind of. I mean, it's again, though, I think someone else forgot to mention is TV roles are also bizarre, because in any other industry, you kind of know what most jobs mean. In our industry, you could be a script editor at one company and do a totally different job to a script editor at another company, for example, which is my role now. You could be a development producer at one place and it's totally different. Do you know what I mean? So the jobs mean different things. So in theory, yes, we're in my sort of line of work, because it tends to be more office-based, although you're working on set still, you have a line manager above you, yeah. So at the moment, I have like a line manager, but then you'd have like a series producer and an exec producer. So there's sort of a chain of command, but again, it's so confusing because it's different everywhere. But yes, in theory, there is a line manager.
So I'm not going to get you to name names, but you've probably had a line manager who, if not to you, to somebody near you, has gone, in my day, we were made to do X, Y, and Z and things like that. However, if you really break that down, there is a systematic thing of, because I went through this trauma, I'm expecting you to go through the same trauma as well, because it's only fair. And I think that is being broken down now. I think that we have seen both people in front of the camera and behind the camera being maybe not exactly held accountable, but at least there's a bit of distance between the people who are producing now more than ever. Do I still know some people who really shouldn't be in television? Absolutely. Am I going to say their name on a podcast for fear of not working again? No. And that is it. There's still so many people who hold that power. So, yeah.
And also, I know loads of ADs, because I think we talked about, I think you did an article about this. The Hugh Grant thing was big recently. It went viral because, not Hugh Grant, Richard E. Grant is the one. That's twice I've done that. I've said the wrong person. It's Friday night. No one minds. They know what I mean.
Friday night, we're on chamomile. It's gone mental, mate. Don't worry about it.
Richard E. Grant, this whole thing about his daughter being, having a terrible time and saying how runners are badly treated. I completely see that. I was a COVID runner, and the worst treatment I've had in my career was when I was a COVID runner. I feel a lot more respected as a scripter. I've been very lucky. I haven't had too many bad experiences personally. I know loads of people that have, and I can see why that broke through. But the way that ADs, the culture works, even close friends of mine who are ADs, I hear them justify the behaviour. Well, they do shout, but it's because we're all trying to get things done. And I've already seen them change their approach. And I know that 3 years ago they would have agreed with me. Whereas I'm completely like, no, I'm not. I think it's unacceptable to behave like that on a film set and to speak to people like that. So I think it's interesting that there's cultures in certain departments which become normal. And I think there's loads of people who are ADs who I'd see in the pub and I'd think, you're lovely. But then at work, I'm like, nah, I don't agree with how you're behaving.
That is so interesting. Let me tell you why I think that's interesting. Because I think my genres have gone the exact opposite way to yours. I think it's really interesting how you said that as soon as people step up to an AD role, it's they're only shouting, it's okay, blah, blah, blah. Yes, I think that with a progression in a career, there comes an element of more responsibility and understanding for more senior roles. However, I think what's happened in scripted and entertainment, which from what you say is almost done the opposite, is that people who have now gone up to exec producing, or even just elevated, sometimes even people who are there would not say the things that they would say 5 years ago. I worked recently, actually I didn't work with him, but kind of 6-7 years ago, we knew of this exec producer who was known for being a massive wanker. It's the only way I can say it. It's a massive wanker. Shouting at people, unrealistic expectations, expecting you to hit the ground running without any training, which we need to talk about, by the way. The fact that this industry has no training, it expects us to know what we don't know. And then at the beginning of this year, when obviously there's little to no jobs, I volunteer for committee on a TV and film union called BAFTA. And so sometimes I get invited to events just to be there and just say, hey, BAFTA's here. These are the benefits of joining a union. Come and join the union so we can make an overall difference to the television industry, hopefully. And then in walks that exec producer, and his tone completely changed. And I went over to him to offer an orange branch, going, oh, do you remember the time when you did X and Y? No, I don't remember that. And I thought, God, he's got a really shit memory. And then eventually he took me to one side, was like, I just don't want to admit that I was that person. Because most of the people like me who are acted like that, they've now gone from television. And I haven't heard from them in 5-6 years. So it's really interesting. It is getting slightly better, especially in the non-scripted genres. But it has a massive way to go, especially with the lack of jobs now. I can't say who, and I can't be specific, but we get a lot of calls at BAFTA from people who have said they offered me the job and then rescinded it. And then they got somebody else who was usually white, straight man, who's probably done the job like for them kind of like 8 or 9 years ago, but they happen to be best mates with the exec producer because they grew up together or they came up through the ranks together. So we went quite well after COVID. We started being inclusive and down. We've just gone back down again to this funnel. And we've used the fact that we haven't got enough resources and there's a lack of money to just say, oh, that's right, I'll just hire my mate again. There's lots of people who've been made redundant. And we also get messages saying that people in those recruiting positions are so overwhelmed that they sometimes just don't know what to do. They say that they've got, 300 people applying for one position and they've got 5 days to fill that position. How is somebody supposed to do that? So I really do feel for people. It is mad. It is mad, especially as whenever I think in most creative industries, actually, when the money starts to run out, the thing that goes the first is human and people resources, as in the people who are responsible for looking after us. So yeah, I'm not surprised.
There's, again, every time you say something, I'm like listening so much that it's actually sometimes hard to know which part to respond to, because there's so much that I'm agreeing with and I think
you're being so sweet.
No, I'm being genuine. It's super interesting, and I think it's going to be such a good value episode for people. And I'm wanting to do more things like this on the show because I think it's so important right now. And the episode I referenced Phil earlier, but that episode's done incredible because I think so many people relate to like what's going on. We're not talking about this enough because it's not being picked up in media. Because as we'd said before, it's a glamorous industry. So, like for example, car manufacturing, and I'm not saying what's happened to them isn't terrible. It is terrible. More people are at work in TV than are at work with some of these closures at factories at the moment, but it's not on the news because it's not, do you know what I mean? It's not trendy enough. I mean, there was a great article this week in the Telegraph, which I'll link below, about why British TV is sort of dying and stuff. So there is starting to be more conversations about it, and people like yourself are writing articles and things on and posting them. But like, I do think we need more conversation around it, and it's good to have. But quickly, again, on the thing we were saying about cultures and running, stuff like that. Like, obviously, this is just the examples I'm giving are just small from what I've seen in drama. I'm not speaking on behalf of the whole industry. And again, I'm not generalizing at all. But so just so people aren't listening, I'm not trying to accuse everyone that's an AD of being part of that culture.
He is. He told me off camera that he is. No, I'm kidding. Of course you're not. Go on, carry on.
I want to work again, please, in drama. No, I think what would be really interesting to ask you, and I mean, there's still lots more to cover, but your article about why people might want to leave TV, I really caught my eye. That's why I reached out to you when I saw that article. I think it was really interesting. And in truth, there's a lot of my colleagues and me have had conversations recently where we're like, we love our jobs, we like doing this, but this is not sustainable. Like, I can't keep going through the same thing every year when my contract starts to go to the end, knowing, am I going to get renewed? I mean, I'm in my late 20s. I'm very lucky. Like, I don't have a family at the moment. I don't have anyone that's, I'm responsible for. But like, if I want to buy a place or, settle down and have a family, like, I don't feel very secure, do you know what I mean, in this line of work. And God forbid what it's like for people who want to have kids right now. Things like maternity leave aren't very available for them. Lots of other issues like that completely. But to sort of talk to us a bit about that article you wrote and what are the alternative careers that people could maybe go and work in as well. So I think it's really useful. And I think there's a conversation worth having.
Thank you so much. That's really nice of you to say. I think I write articles, and I think I title a lot of them an idiot experts, because I don't clarify myself as an expert by any means. What I try to do is I try to write articles in order to try and find out the answers that I'm looking for. So when it became, I was very lucky because I think let's be honest, we've had a crisis since about 2023. The end of 2022, 2023 is probably when it really hit, to maybe beginning of 2023. I think that's when the crisis really started. And we started at first seeing things not being recommissioned that did quite well. We're like, oh, why is that? And then all of a sudden, production companies, their development deals got rescinded, and then there was no development deals, as in you couldn't get money to develop things anymore. So that's a bit strange. And then budgets got slashed without any warning, as in production managers would have to reduce resources by about 18 grand in the space of like 2 to 3 days. So it started kind of like as a snowball. And the thing is that as freelancers, we were dependent on these roles. But I think it wasn't until this happened that we didn't realize how little knowledge we had of how things work and why things work. So that's a really big reason why I wanted to write these articles. The article you're talking about in question, it was, I think the title, and you can probably correct me about my own article, I'm sorry, I haven't got the glasses on, but I think it was something of why I'm thinking about quitting TV for a bit and why I think you should too. I say it again, I love television, and I think although I'm really enjoying this new career, which we will go on to later, and I'll explain why I'm loving it so much. Television is probably where there's like it's that toxic boyfriend again, where it's not good for you, but you'll always probably want to go back when they give you a bell. I think that the reason why I wanted to write it is because I wanted to remind people and myself that just because I didn't have a contract didn't mean that it was anything to do with my own self-worth. People, like I said before, award-winning people have been out of a job for sometimes over 2 years. Some of the most talented people in our industry, not just in the country, in our whole television industry, have been out of work. And it's got nothing to do with how good they are. It's got all to do with just being there at the right time and the right resources. So first of all, I wanted to let people know that, and just a little reminder. And it's just a silly little thing of just having a deep breath and doing it. Then I wanted to reassure people that there is a trope in television that if you take a break from television, it's really hard to get back into it. I don't think that is applicable anymore, just due to needs must. I think that people from television have migrated to other media, whether that's teaching it, whether that's advertising, ad-funded programming, branded content, short form, online content, and film. Although we know that that's been having its own problems as well. And the reason for that is because A, they needs must, B, they still love to be creative and some love to have that output. But what I think is happening is that once they dip their toes into the outside pool, like I did, they go, oh, I've got my weekends and my evenings back. Oh, I've got actually money to spend and a budget for something I want to film. Oh my God, I've got HR. I've got maternity leave. I have a retirement. I have a pension for my retirement. Company benefits. I've just started a job where I get a dental plan, and I thought that was genuinely just left for people in American sitcoms. Genuinely, it was like that and IHOP. I was just like, they both just don't exist. But I think that once people start going outside, they do see the benefits. And I think that television has got a lot to speak for itself right now. And I don't think I do think it's a trickle-down effect. I think that a big reason why we're in the position that we are, yes, due to advertiser funding, sales were down. Yes, due to economic crises involving COVID, involving, economic downturn, involving, even Trump getting elected affected the economy and things like that. However, massive reasons as well as why we don't have any resources is because we didn't prepare for rainy days after COVID. We over asked for things in COVID because we had those 6, 7, 8 months where we didn't produce anything besides news, or have I got news for you, which is a bit random. And then so immediately, as soon as we could, we just shot out the gate and said, give me everything you've got. I remember being in COVID, and just as the cusp, we were all kind of like getting to know that it's probably going to come out soon. I haven't met with so many commissioners in such a short amount of time. And I remember in one meeting them saying yes, not just let's see the next bit, saying yes to 4 separate ideas. And I've never been in a room with that as well since. It was overcompensate. It's stupid. It was overcompensating for a short amount of time, and then they go, it's all right, we'll make up for it in next year's budget. Oh, but then the Queen died, and then there was a correlation, and then we also hosted the Eurovisions. It's okay, we'll make up for it in next year's budget. And we never did. And I think that's a lack of responsibility, and almost where this thing that you and I keep coming back to, which is this snobbery, thinking we'll always be fine. Everyone will always want to come back. And I think that with streaming services, online content, and basically the capital that can be gained with social first media, I think that it's got television rightfully kind of by the chokehold, you know. Chokehold isn't a word. It's chokehold. I don't know. It's this chamomile tea is hitting me hard. So that's another reason why I wanted. I need another one soon. That's another reason why I wanted to break it down. I think I wrote another article that I'm so surprised did really well, and I think that's the one. Maybe forgive me if it's not. It's the one that you reached out to, and it was just plainly titled "Why I Think the Economic Crisis is That," or something like that, and it was really basic. But we can definitely attribute a lot of our talents or skill sets to other roles. If I break it down, my role I'm going to use true crime as an example. So if I break down my skill sets on true crime, I'm going to say that I was a line manager, quite basic, right? I wrote the scripts. I did the risk assessments, so it's health and safety. I'm also trained as a first aider because I had to be, because I was the only first aider on set. I resourced all of the content, so I did all the research. That included connecting with people, probably through people who've been within the prison systems, and there's safeguarding as well, being trained on safeguarding. Then there's hiring people, so there's about legalities, contracts, sometimes POs, invoicing, tax, things like that you've got to learn about. And then I also shoot myself. So there's camera skills involved with that as well. I also edit a bit. I'm not very good, but I can still edit a bit. So that's for the basic skill sets, but also understanding what works in the story and how the narrative and how a through line of a story can be navigated. Because it was tented subject matter, I obviously wanted to be there for my contributors. So I was almost like an agony aunt, and I was on call 24/7. The same with my crew members. I was also safeguarding them as well. So that's mental well-being as well as physical. I was also cheerleader, mother, best friend, boss. When you break it down like that, there are so many other avenues just off that list alone that I could go into. But I do think that sometimes our industry, maybe unintentionally, makes us feel as though we're not as good as we think we are, in order to keep us in those lanes of feeling that we're lucky to be there and siloed. So there's so many other things. If I can be specific to somebody who is looking to go into another occupation, I say do it. I say start off as freelance. Get yourself social media pages that are not attributed to your personal one. Please don't look at mine, because yes, I cross-post pictures of my cat on both, and I know it's not professional, but don't do what I've done. Get Instagram and social media pages, because what I love to see on a CV is I love to see somebody who is posting on social media about the things that they're passionate about. And I think the safest thing for that, because often we'll do casting through social media, is definitely having a false name, or at least don't put your image and where you're from or where you live on there. Second of all, I I think it's the best thing is to ask ChatGPT. This is a controversial one. So
listen, I'm with you on this. We need to embrace. But I'll let you finish what you're saying, and I'll go into that.
We need to embrace AI, because if we don't, then we're going to be left behind, especially in video production of any kind. But what I think is brilliant is copying and pasting your existing CV, or if you don't even have that, just some of your brief experience, and then asking ChatGPT. You are an expert at hiring people and also with assessing transferable skills. Analyze my credits, rewrite my CV so that's advantageous for whatever industries you want to go into. Make me sound like an expert in my field. Make me sound approachable. And then also write me a cover letter to match this. Send. And then it will really help. Yeah. And if you're not sure about it, sometimes what I do is I will do something in ChatGPT. I'll then get Perplexity, which is another AI platform, which is known for stat checking and factual confirmation. And I'll say, I've just written this in ChatGPT. Can you fact check it? And it'll be like, this is wrong. This is wrong. Great. Fantastic. Brilliant. Will I sometimes put it through a third? Absolutely. Why not?
And then also you can edit it yourself as well. You can still have the human, like my job, I'm a script editor, so I'll do things on chat. So I've never talked about this before. I did the podcast bios on ChatGPT. Now I'm very busy. I'm doing this on top of a full-time job. It's my concept. It'll give me a better bio. It'll give me a hookier bio. I'll then put some small tweaks on it, but it's very useful. And we need to. It's here. It's we can use it and learn how to use it. Or we can just pretend it doesn't exist. But I think the best solution is the first.
Definitely. And most of them will be free. A lot of services out there, especially, if you start applying for jobs, you'll probably get spammed in your inbox going, hey, looking for a job? I can do your CV for free. You don't need it. You just get one of those AI platforms to do it for you. Definitely always double check it, because bless them, the technology is getting there. It's getting there fast, but we don't have access to that yet. So just always triple check and make sure that it makes you sound like a human being. Or just rewrite it, because that's the best way to do it. So we've spoken about doing social media, redoing your CV through AI, because it literally takes seconds. And it just something. I remember when I was out of work for a little bit and I was starting to get a little bit worried. Luckily, I actually picked up jobs through consulting. But the way that I decided to do consulting was one day I put my CV through ChatGPT and they were like, you'd be a brilliant consultant. And I was like, well, how do I do that? So then I asked ChatGPT, how do I become a consultant? Please give me clear, definable, step-by-step guide to be a consultant within the UK TV unscripted industry. And it did. Bam, 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 bam. Okay, that's brilliant. Can you write me a business plan? Brilliant. There are so many resources that you don't need to pay for that are there just to help you. I don't want anyone to listen to this thinking that they're stuck in a position where they don't have, there's no help for them. There are places like TV and film charity, BECTU, even if you're not a member, just approach them and tell them what is happening. Also, loads of other the film charity. I can help. I think I've posted a bunch of them in a previous article, and I'm really happy to send that to you again if people wanted to link to some resources.
Links, just for people listening, there'll be links to you. There'll be links to all your work and LinkedIn and stuff in this episode bio. So right now, scroll down and it'll all be there. So
be here, like there, like about there.
Yeah, just it'll be below. It'll be below.
There that there, yeah. There we go.
I'm copying you. I'm also having a can of milk tea. So there we go. In solidarity.
We're going to fall asleep. I am one of those very typical telly people who I've just stopped smoking after 17, 18 years. I remember we're recording now, aren't we?
Yeah, but I was going to edit out, so it's fine.
No, I don't want you to. This is funny. One of my first jobs in TV was my director was teaching me how to roll cigarettes. And he goes, just stand there. And I want 20 by the time that we're done with this. And he was so lovely. But he said that it was to teach me how to roll. What he was actually doing is he was making sure that I could see the monitor. And he was going, you see that? That's a grid. And you always want somebody to be able to, if somebody's having a conversation with you, for example, if I'm sat at this side and I'm having a conversation with you, but you're sat off camera here, I'm always going to want to show more of this side of me in the edit than this side. And, teach me all about like head frame and stuff like that. But yeah, that's how I started smoking, was with my director.
So just to recap on the question I asked you, which is so basically for people wanting to pivot maybe from a career where they're at the moment in TV into maybe something similar and that's creative, but they can get more stable employment from. So we'd said make social media pages that, make you look interested and look like you have opinions and thoughts and things. Use AI in a way to like do up your CV and cover letter. What other things could they maybe try or would be useful for them and from your experiences of doing this as well?
I'm going to say networking, but it's not for the reasons that you think. I'm going to say networking, and it's not to meet exec producers or showrunners or people who are going to fund your next project, because really, sorry to say, they won't go because they don't need to. Because they usually get either people like me to hire crew internally or they'll get a recruitment agency. The reason why you go to networking events is that you build that camaraderie and you build that resilience together. I've never made so many telly friends that I have this year. And without them, and vice versa, I hope, we wouldn't have got through this and also encourage each other to, at least for now, leave television. So don't go to networking to try and get a job. Go to networking to try and forge some form of connections. Because you know what?
I mean, I think that's good advice for good networking anyway. I think if you go to network and trying to get something from someone, then usually you don't anyway. If you just have a connection, tends to naturally lead to opportunity more anyway. So I think that's really good advice.
I was the cringiest networker in the beginning. I would just like hover behind people, just be like, hello, my name is Hannah and I'd like to work in, like, nobody wants to talk to you anyway if you're like that. But if you're honest,
teaches them how to network, do they?
No, they don't. You don't need a card. A LinkedIn, genuinely, especially in this day and age, now that things are kind of like coming off of solely off of getting recruited on talent manager and production base. A LinkedIn page does help. Just do me a favor, make sure your LinkedIn page is A, up to date, B, has links to stuff, and C, also has pictures and testimonials. And, it's really simple to learn how to do all of that. And you also don't need a plus gold thing, whatever they say, you don't need that. Another thing that's really useful, I think that you may be wanting to leave television because you want to leave television, as in you tried it, it's not for you for whatever reason. Or the reason may be because due to economic downturn, health, physical and mental, whatever, you feel as though you're forced out or you've been pushed out. First of all, I'd like to say, however long amount of time you leave television, it is now more than ever able to come back into it again. There used to be this trope, and I think we started talking about it before. There used to be this trope where if you went away for maternity leave, even for sickness, for sabbatical, first of all, there's no such thing as a sabbatical in television anyway. You just leave and you'll be lucky to come back. Now that because people are starting to leave television to go to places where there are human resources, where there are stable in company structure, where there is benefits, I think that now more than ever, television production companies, streamers and broadcasters are now realizing that it's going to be harder to bring the freelancers back. And I think it'll be for pay reasons, because unless it's online, which is short form online content that isn't involved in advertising, that is unregulated. So unfortunately, like television, it's unregulated, so you can't exactly enforce a rate card, for example. But advertising, branded content, ad-funded programming, corporate video especially, pay way more. Advertising, you're joking? Like a week of a researcher would probably be more than I would get as an exec producer in 3.5 weeks. It is ridiculous. You get to forge way better friendships. The hours are usually better. There's usually more money in the project. So people, probably have longer timelines, less stressed, actually given food and drink to have, like having water on set again, that would be lovely. And it not having to go on my credit card. Things like that. So I think that now that people realize that people are seeing the benefits of going outside the television company, my feeling is that even when money does come in to television again, and I think that it will, I think it will look the commissioning landscape of television is going to look very different. And I think the only way for it to survive really is going to have to be through finding alternative funding. But I think I don't think television's dead. I think it's just going to look very different and feel very different. I think another thing to realize after that massive tangent. So whether you feel as though you want to leave television or whether you're pushed out, seeing the next step as an exciting clean slate is probably one of the most important things. There have been times in my career where I haven't had a job, and I've been very lucky to have consistent work throughout my career. But there have been times when I haven't had a career and I've gone, well, that's it. That's me gone. Like me as a person, dead in the water, absolutely. And because of the paranoia that people have in television, because people can outdo each other and you feel dispensable, you just go, someone's had a word with somebody about me and now the whole of ITV hate me. Or you have these regular thoughts of going, Netflix, yeah, they were like, Hannah, she's an absolute dick, don't want anything to do with her. And it makes absolutely no sense, but you start thinking these things. So I think that whether it is a slight deviation from television or film, or even if it is a completely sidestep. There was one point recently where I was like, I'm going to open a natural wine bar in Paris. Do I know anything about wine? No. Do I like Parisians? Yes, very much so. So I just thought, why not do that? Why not try something different? And as soon as that prejudice, I got rid of that prejudice of it has to be television because that's all I've ever known. That's all I've ever been good at. That's all that my personality has ever contributed to. As soon as I got rid of that, this weight lifted off me. And it almost felt like I was like slightly kind of like in like a weird, like, oh my God, I have free will. This is amazing. And as everyone knows, jobs are like buses. So as soon as I kind of like released like this thing of like, I don't need to go back in television, 5 offers came through with after the longest sprint that I ever have. And because I had a completely different mindset to it, not always, I sometimes slip back because I'm human, but because I had a completely different mindset to it, not only did I renegotiate 3 times for this job that I've got now, but I'm also now on more money than I've ever been on, more benefits. And also I just happened to be working with my mates who I met through network. So when they said, oh, we're thinking about hiring this Hannah Beaugeard person, my mate turned around and goes, never worked with her, but I met her through networking. She's a nice person. And that apparently clinched the job.
It goes a long way if you've got a good reputation. So,
well, I don't have that, but
It's useful. No, thank you for for answering that sort of question about alternatives and some of the ways we can think. And I mean, this is a really tough question to answer, but just a quick overview. And you kind of touched on this, but what industries do you think sort of TV skills would translate well into? Just recap that for people. So, even maybe a few companies, for example, that you think. I think you maybe mentioned some of this in your article. Actually, there was things like Gymshark and stuff like that you mentioned.
Yeah. So another thing that's really good for ChatGPT is when you redo your CV through ChatGPT, what you can also do is now find me relevant jobs that match the CV in area of London for the amount of blah, blah, blah. And it will go through and it will try and find them for you. There are some brilliant, if you want to look for yourself, there are some brilliant kind of like larger companies that have multiple arms. So Banijay is a really good example. Yes, they do production, but they also do distribution. They also do many, many different things across many, many different territories. Another thing is teaching. The teaching packages, especially for higher education, are getting a lot better. And they're always looking for people who have up-to-date knowledge and skills. You can even, in some institutions, work part-time, so then you can then actually work. I remember I think a couple of my uni professors actually worked half the week at uni and then worked half the week in studio, and then sometimes we were then even able to go into studio with them. I don't think we were supposed to, but yeah. And then think of all the skills that you can list out like I did. So salespeople, usually as producers or people who create content, the most important thing when I'm hiring somebody is if they're a nice person and approachable. If I'm working with contributors, whether it's a tentative subject matter or if it's for a primetime game show, if I've got someone on my crew that I can't trust to have that respect, mutual respect for the contributors, I've lost the contributors and the whole project's gone, right? Salespeople is really good, and also they have really good benefits. Often can also go part-time, which is great. I'd also, if you're looking to still, I come from a editorial background, but I now produce the shoots. So I can come from a knowledge of that a lot more than, for example, editors. However, editors are a lot more highly sought after now, I would say, because I think that producers and editors are very slowly becoming the same thing, and especially in online production and short form, whether that's for streaming, whether that's for socials. So being able to learn another skill, whether it's producing a shoot or whether it's editing, even learning how to do a little bit of graphic design on Adobe. Yeah. I think Adobe offers certain packages for people who are out of work right now. So definitely look that up. But using this time, and it's such a cliche, but using this time to make yourself a Swiss Army knife, because what's happening more and more is that, for example, people won't ask to hire a producer. They'll need a producer who can also do a lovely treatment on a deck, like do animations and things like this. They're also asking for somebody who maybe has a little bit of editing experience, whether that's to be able to manage an ingest of footage or whether that's to actually edit short form content themselves. Great. I've looked at companies that do lots of high turnover. So things like for people like myself who identify as queer or in the LGBTQIA plus community, things like Pink News, the very high turnover online and Instagram news source, where it's like constantly quick turnarounds. I mean, it's such an exciting atmosphere because it feels like a newsroom, because it essentially is. It's the new normal of news, and how news is, in my opinion, is going to be formed soon. So it's really exciting. I would also look into it's not too bad actually looking into publications. I know that Global, who are responsible for global radio, they're responsible for like Heart and Capital and things like that. They're always looking for video content. More and more high-end video production podcasts are becoming a thing. So they're looking for people to produce them, to help film. Yeah, exactly.
But this is my pet peeve of podcast, and I got into it. It's meant to be an audio medium, right? And now it's all video. So I don't mind. But this is very new to me, all this video stuff. So this is all trial and error. But it's got to adapt with the times. But I'll let you finish what you're saying because it was very useful.
No. I want to interrupt you with a point. Because I think that's really interesting. Did you see that Call Her Daddy, the podcast, got on the Forbes 30 under 30 this week?
No, I didn't actually. It's interesting.
Yeah, so she does a really good interview with Forbes, and I quite like her. I think she's a great entertainer. She also, to me, when there's people, when you just have a conversation with them and they just feel as though they've got like that really good business savvy, they go, oh, I just wish I had that. I feel like she's got that. She said something really interesting. So I think the interviewer said something along the lines of, what made you want to get into podcasting? A really basic question. And she goes, I did not see myself getting into podcasting. I had just been fired from my job. I needed to stay in New York. My parents had told me that they couldn't subsidize me. I had to find a new way. I didn't know how to make a podcast. I think she even admits, maybe I'm making this up, that she barely even listened to them. But what was at the time, what was the fashion was just having a podcast that was a stream of consciousness, as in like Joe Rogan style, 6 hours, they'd just be sat there and you just have it in the background, almost like an audiobook. She was one of the first people to see it as almost like to have as many edits, almost like a TV show. So she'd always cut it up, and not just, cutting up the conversation, but also cutting to different camera angles, cutting to different things in the media, things like that. I think just thinking about what your skill sets are and then saying, okay, so I don't know how to, make a documentary, but I do know how to make scripted. So I'm going to make a documentary in the style of a film. To me, that feels interesting and that feels new. And I've never seen a job advert go, we're looking for the same old, please. I've never seen that before.
So thinking about how you can almost stand out while using your skills is something useful at the moment when in this sort of crazy time.
Yeah, I suppose that is what it boils down to, which I'm really sorry for people at home because, I've only just recently become a full-time employed again. And I can understand how frustrating it is going, build on your skill sets, go networking, or, think of all those wonderful skills you've got and apply them to something new. But they are the bloody tried and tested. There isn't a cheat sheet to this. Everyone goes and bangs on about it, but it is genuinely the best thing I think that had happened to me and has built my resilience in this TV industry to no end. I met a woman one day on a coach. This is true. And she worked in F1. And I don't know how we started talking. But anyway, she told me that she was a journalist in F1. And I was like, that's really exciting. And she goes, yeah, it took me about 787 no's. And I went, that's really specific. She goes, yeah, because you tick them off. As soon as somebody says no, great, next one. As soon as someone's great, next one. And you put a number in your head. She said, give me a number. I was like 500. She goes, great. You don't have to wait until 500 no's before you get a yes. But it's easier now because you're going to get a yes. Because after those 500, it can be 25,000, but you're going to get a yes. So as long as you're going to get a yes, great. If you get it beforehand, brilliant, bully for you. But then the counter then starts again. So it builds up that resilience. You know that you're going to get rejected. you know that things are going to say no. I got an email just now when we had a break for a job that I applied for 6 months ago. And thanks, but no thanks. I was like, I don't remember applying for you. Do you know what I mean? You get rejections every single day.
I absolutely love that. We had a similar thing on the podcast a couple of years ago, and it was the exact same thing. It's like someone was saying that they chase 100 rejections a year, because if you go for 100 rejections, you're going to get probably 10, or maybe not. It's hard to know, but you're going to get quite a few yeses in that, just by the laws of probability. If you're doing it by number, you're going to get a few yeses as well. So great way to reframe it. Yeah,
like I said, you might get a yes beforehand, brilliant, but just that counter is going to start again. And that psychological thing of, as long as you know that there is a yes, I reckon 98% of people are still going to keep going, because they know that eventually there's going to be a yes. There has to be a yes. My mum's got this saying, if it's not right, it's not the end. And I'm a very big believer in that.
My grand said something similar, what's for you won't go by you. And I don't always know if I believe it, but I think it's a good way of, definitely helps you keep going.
Definitely. And I think creative industries, even outside of TV and film, they're so hard to stay in. Even if, like me, you've got an amazing support circle. The amount of times my parents, through love, and my friends, again, through wanting the best for me, have said, we think it's time to quit now, babe. And they were probably right. And I was just stubborn. And I was like, no, I've got more no's to get through. But
it's a good way of looking at it. It's definitely empowering. I'm sort of trying to do that at the moment. And it's difficult, isn't it, to get out of your comfort zone? It's hard, but you've got to just pushing yourself out there. But I do think as well, right, that if you do, I think it's also thinking about what extra stuff can I do, even if I'm working at the moment and I'm really busy, or if you're not working and you really, and I totally sympathize, it's really hard, but what extra things can I do that are a bit outside the box? Now, for example, just to use myself, I'm not saying doing a podcast is the most original thing, but this show has done so much for my career as well, because I get to meet people all the time, which isn't why I do it, but it's a great networking tool. From a selfish point of view, it's a great networking tool because you can just interview people. I've learned a shit ton of extra skills, and I'm constantly in tune with what's going on because it's forcing me to have conversations. And I do it because I love it, but that's all the bonus stuff that comes out of it. So I'm not saying that that's what people should necessarily do, but think about what could I start a blog or a Substack, or what's something that you think is missing? Because I also felt in Scotland and in the creative industry, there's not enough resources for people to find out what's going on.
That is a very good point, actually.
So it's thinking about what's missing. I mean, not that I work in window cleaning, but I heard this on a podcast I did. I thought it was great. It was instead of trying to start the window cleaning business that there's 100 of them already, why don't you start the business that trains the window cleaner? So it's stepping back and thinking what's missing. I think that's really empowering as well, of where you can maybe place yourself at the moment.
100%. It just reminded me, at the weekend, I met a really lovely lady in a bar, obviously. And she had started a home marketing company which specialized in social media content to promote laundromats in the States. And she sold it for minutes. She goes, doesn't care what it's about. It's the marketing bit that's passionate for me. And she sold it for, I think, for quite a lot of money, because she's now 27 and she's now on company number 3, and she's got her own flat in Zone 1 in central London, and she's absolutely loving life. So I think that's a testament that if you figure out the bit that you like, lean into that bit. So, for example, just saying, I just miss working television, but what bit of it? No, I just miss it all. I was like, well, what bit do you really miss the most? And for me, the bit that I miss when I'm out of work is I miss the bit where I'm not felt needed and I'm not felt relied upon. That's the bit that I miss. I miss putting out fires. So I then gravitated towards roles in other sectors that were specific in that. Solving, high pressure, high turnaround. My gosh, talk about resilience. I don't think there's very few other industries that are more resilient than ours. So yeah, I think the things to answer your question, things that are outside the box. What I've been doing quite a lot this year is I've been working with people who, because there are no jobs, they've made their own. And I think sometimes that's great. Personally, that's not my personality type. I don't want my own production company. I'd rather become the head of a production company, head of production or something. And I think the next stage would be to maybe one day own my own network, as in own my own streaming service. That would be amazing. But again, I don't think that I am at that stage yet where I want to. But the amount of people who I've worked with this year who've started their own businesses and companies because they haven't had the jobs is amazing. And we're not talking about, a unscripted production company. We're talking about, again, finding that bit that you found really interesting. I was talking to this guy who was telling me that one of his favorite gigs ever in television was, I think it was a Jules Holland gig. And I think it was during the Edinburgh Fringe. And what they did is that they rented out like a dive bar, essentially. And they did a live recording of Jules Holland every day from Edinburgh using like this like really rickety, but quite mobile, like OB rig, kind of like for like the audio and for the cameras and stuff. He said, I've always loved that kit and I've always kept up to date with it because I find that bit interesting. So now he set up his own company where he now makes it. And he is now earning an absolute packet and absolutely loves it. So there is a thing of setting up your own company. Obviously, that comes with a lot of kind of like errors and things like that. The tried and tested thing is whatever you sit down to watch at the end of a shit day is probably what you should be aiming to make. So I used to sit down and watch true crime to relax. I know, I'm so individual. But I then naturally gravitated towards kind of like more tentative subject matters, dealing with kind of sensitive subjects, dealing with sensitive people for understandable, like traumatic reasons, and things like that. It's not really the answer to your question, though. I think you're asking.
No, I think to sort of summarize, though, what we're kind of saying is like there's lots of different things you can do, and I think that's quite empowering because it feels very helpless right now. And I'm not trying to overload people and so we have to go, oh, I've got to think of all these things. But I think it's bigger questions. What do you call it? It's like pulling up and thinking, because it's when you're in the moment, you're in fight or flight, you're like, I need to survive. It's stepping back if you're able to and going, what do I enjoy doing? What am I good at? Where could I fit myself in the current marketplace? I don't know. I'm feeling very aligned with this whole idea at the moment. I'm thinking a lot about it as well. And I think that's quite, just thinking about things like that is very empowering, and there's lots of good things for us to take from our conversation in that area. So I think there's some really useful stuff on like alternative careers and other ways of thinking about it. We're probably not going to get through all your career in the time we have, because try to keep the podcast under 2 hours if I can, just for people to listen. So I think we're going to have you back on in future now for sure to talk about your story.
Definitely.
There's lots we're not going to cover, but I think maybe for the next, we don't have to put an exact timer on it, but just to sort of end things on it might be useful to sort of ask a few other questions I had for you, which is what's the biggest lesson you've had from working in TV for as long as you have? What's the biggest lesson you maybe learned from that?
That everyone deserves empathy. And when I started off in television, it felt very cutthroat. It felt like you can't mess up. And I think that I really love being a line manager. And it's because I think it's so that I can hopefully not pass on those negative traits that I think were almost passed on to me as a manager. Mm-hmm. And I think that really attributes, and I think I touched upon this earlier, to the craft as well. I think you need to give everyone, even abhorrent people, like, for example, the recent Martha Stewart documentary on Netflix. Mm-hmm. Brilliant documentary. I think it was documentarian who also made a few other really brilliant stuff. So anything that's that producer, look him up. I think he's a Scot as well. Nice. When you watch it, you go, Jesus Christ, nobody likes this woman, Martha Stewart. Because even our best friends are slagging you off. But the interesting thing is you immediately go, oh, it's a bad person. But then you immediately go, what kind of place must she be in if her own friends are saying that? And even that little glimmer makes me then want to watch the series more and be like, well, now I'm kind of rooting for her. We all want the underdog to win. Now I kind of want her to win. So although she did these kind of like things where, you know, she spoke to her staff like disgustingly, and she was so anally retentive about everything, to the point where she has publicly come out saying that she doesn't like the documentary because they didn't include some of the sound and music suggestions that she suggested. So that's how, but I think my point is that even when I've filmed with criminals or sex workers or worked with really abhorrent television, TV presenters, everyone still deserves that empathy, and everyone still deserves that bit of humanity. And I think that little bit has really helped me. Also, don't be a dick, because people remember it. Is a really big thing. Yeah, that's what I say to university students. I say you can be late, you can even be rude, but don't be a dick. Just don't be a dick.
No, it's really good.
Yeah,
it's really good. What has surprised you most in your career so far?
I think the thing that surprised me most is, and it goes, I think today's theme has been, you know, defying what a environment that you're immediately in will tell you. And I think the thing that surprised me most is how good in this industry, creative industry, people are, and that they don't even see it themselves. And then when somebody, probably to be fair, a mate, will say that, they'll say that about me and I won't believe it. So it surprises me that still super, super talented people don't see their worth and don't see how good they are.
We tend to be our hardest critics, I think, as creative people. I don't know why, but it seems to be a trend.
Definitely. And I think that is changing with newer generations. And it's why I absolutely love it. And I think it's great. And I learned so much from that. I said something very Gen Z in a meeting earlier, and everyone just went a bit funny. And I was just like, no, God damn it.
Gotta own it.
Yeah.
That's a really good answer. Again, we covered a lot of the crisis in the start. And I know you're not a politician, and I know you've not got a magic wand, but what do you think what would you change now if you could? What do you think something we could do now that might make a difference to the state of the industry and what's happening?
I think there's a lot to unpick in order to change the industry, because I think that a lot of what happened has been in the last 5 to 10 years, but then also another huge part of the reason why we're here is because things haven't changed. I think that television is here to stay, but I think that the commissioning landscape has to change drastically. And I think that institutions and larger broadcasters and streamers have to realize that they're no longer the puppet players anymore. And they have to go to other places because they don't have the one thing that we need, and that is money. going to places like branded content or going through ad-funded programming instead, I think is definitely the way forward. I also think that maybe seeking other platforms through advertising. YouTube right now, there isn't a lot of money to be made, but it's still some. So yeah, I think that branded content, advertising, and television should just become one big kind of disgusting big blob. And to me, it makes the most sense because that's exactly where our viewing habits are going. They're becoming more on demand. They're becoming more streaming, more, for example, I will watch a podcast in the background and I'll just have it on in the background, but then I'll still be on my second screen. So I'm essentially digesting two versions
right now.
Yeah.
People are doing that right now with us. They're listening to this, I hope. And you know what? You have a scroll on Twitter right now, whoever you are. As long as you're downloading the show, I'm happy. But you're taking something away.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very true.
Same people who are like the cool my daddies, the same people who are, like the Joe Rogans. They're absolutely laughing their way to the bank right now because we just didn't listen. Content creators, I remember, were practically laughed outside of a massive TV production building that I worked in. And now they're some of the most successful, most lucrative businesses in the world. And I think that snobbery that we get back to hasn't put us in good stead. And I think that's a big lesson as well, to not be a snob, because you don't know what's going to happen. This is such a transient, transactional industry that we've chosen. You always have to go with the dodges as well, but then you will then also have to keep on being hungry and keep on learning what the next thing is, or for fear of being left behind. Had I not have had the last 2 years of being a consultant in branded content, I wouldn't be employed today. And that is the truth. If I would have stayed in television, I would still be out of a job. And that is the truth. And I think that when we start to realize that making different genres as well as different forms of media, from streaming to broadcast to terrestrial to online, they're not separate things. It's just a way of ingesting information. I think that when we start to learn that a bit better, then I think that that's where the sweet spot's going to be. But, I've been speaking to commissioners of UK broadcasters for last year, and unfortunately, from the inside, I don't think that they've got the message yet.
And it's tricky, and it doesn't seem to be. I just don't hear enough people talking about this from at a high enough level, in truth, and it's sad. And again, it's maybe systemic, but you watch the BAFTAs and stuff. No one's saying on. I'm happy for people winning awards. It's great. I mean, I'm speaking to a BAFTA award winning right now to remind people, but it's great. But no one's saying in their acceptance speeches people are out of work, blah blah blah. It just feels like it's just not been talked about enough, and I hope it does trickle through.
I think that unfortunately, in a time where there is such insecurity, often people become quite quiet again. And I think it's the time when we've got to be the exact opposite, because if we do go back to being quiet again, then it's not going to go back to the way things were, because it's too late. The damage is done to our society. I don't think the resurgence of having channel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's it, is ever going to happen again. Technology's moved on too far. We have more choice than ever. But I think that the reason why, with your example, at the BAFTAs, they weren't saying people are out of work, is because there are still people in that room who decide whether you're in work or not. And that's it.
Yeah. True. Yeah. Well, sometimes I do worry, like, am I being quite brave at the moment with this? But then I'm not saying anything against anyone. And I'm not saying, and I don't think you or I, we're not actually criticising anyone individually. And we're not criticising. This is what we're just sharing viewpoints and trying to have a discussion, which I'm sure lots of people will relate to and hopefully have nodded along with or learned something from. And I think it's vital.
hugely. And I think that if somebody doesn't want to hire you for having an opinion different to theirs, then you probably don't want to be hired by them anyway.
No, that's very true. There's been so much to unpack in this conversation. I've just got one more question for you, and we're definitely going to have you back on. I want to do an episode about your career because I think it'll be really interesting. So we'll organise that. But what would you say to someone right now if they came to you and said, I want to work in TV? Because between us, if people ask me that at the moment, I kind of just want to say, I don't want to discourage people. I'm doing a careers podcast about the arts, for God's sake. I want to encourage people, but I can't in good faith tell someone it's going to be a very easy career right now. But like, you know, what would you say to them? What advice would you give to them?
I'd say definitely do it, but be open to getting into it in ways in which wasn't traditional beforehand. For example, starting off as a runner, doing those runner jobs, researcher, working at AP, then producer, then series producer, then exec producer, then commissioning editor, then, you know, that's usually the way in editorial it goes, for factual anyway, and entertainment. I would say to people that if they want to get into television, do it. But then why television in particular? Why don't you want to get into online? Loads more jobs, there's loads more opportunities, especially for people in entry-level roles. Cowshed, Lad Bible, Future Studios has just gone bust, but there are way more other ways of getting into just creating the content that you love to see. And I think that's the key. I love the stuff that I'm doing right now. It's not television, but it's probably been the most creative that I've been in a couple of years, with the most resources I've ever had for a couple of years, and also the most support that I've ever had in a couple of years. It's a very big change. And my God, sometimes I still get that guilt of, you know, I'm not in telly, I'm a BAFTA award-winning person who's not in telly, I'm a sellout, blah, blah, blah. Or, you know, I must not be good enough if I'm not in television right now. But that's bullshit. It's bullshit. It's nothing to do with a person's, how good a person is. By God, sometimes rarely it is. Like sometimes rarely people just don't get the message. But I think that's very rare, especially in an industry that keeps on telling even the good people that they're not good enough. Yeah. So if you want to get into telly, do it. Just try different avenues. I was a floor manager for a television 24-hour shopping channel. Like, you know, the reason why my CV is a patchwork quilt is because I went for any job that would take me. I think that's been a positive and a negative. A positive because I've been able to have an incredibly varied career in terms of different roles that I've played. But yeah, don't be afraid to kind of jump into something a bit new and just, I'm not sure this is right. I think it might be too good for me, or I'm probably too good for it. Just give it a go.
I was going to say, I feel like one of the themes that's come up time and time again tonight is almost like ripping up the old rule book. We're in a new time, and, you know, not trying to follow, like, there's not a structure to it. There's no right path in this industry anyway. Everyone's path is different, but I do think at the moment more than ever, there isn't the same rule book as the old days. And I think, you know, we maybe do need to try and think about things differently.
All I was going to say was, if you can't find a job, start making stuff yourself and put it out there yourself, because it's free to do so. And if anything, that's how people get discovered now. It's not really through CVs and stuff like that. Even if I'm asking for an editor or a production editor or producing editor, I'll say, have you got a show reel? Have you got stuff I can see? You've got an Instagram page? Have you not? Like, you know, so I can just see what your interests are and what your profile is like and what your, you know, but yeah. Cool.
For sure. Hannah, this has been nearly 2 hours, but an amazing episode. This is exactly why I started podcasting, to have conversations like this. I think it's really useful. We covered a lot of things, but I think there's so much useful resources and useful ideas and topics that for people to have taken away from, and hopefully get them thinking about what the alternatives are. So thank you so much for your time on a Friday night. Really appreciate it. And please keep doing what you're doing, because I think it's important to have voices like yourself in this industry that are, you know, contributing in the way you are. So thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much. It's been brilliant. Hopefully you can get something out of that.
I'm sure we will.